What is art without the muse? Many of art history's most famous works are depictions of women. But who were these women? Do they have their own stories to share with the world? Hello, I'm Grace Anna, host of Art Muse, a podcast that aims to reshape the ways in which we interpret well-known works of art by paying dues to the women whose images have been immortalized, but whose names and stories have been wrongfully overlooked. While these women's faces are familiar to viewers around the world, their identities have been largely forgotten. Each episode of Art Muse focuses our attention on the female muse, sharing their lives and important legacy. Together, we will appreciate these works of art from a new perspective, through the eyes of the women whose image stares back at us. Art Muse is available for streaming on all listening platforms. We look forward to sharing with you the life stories of the women behind some of the world's most important works of art.
Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be talking about a legendary Black actress from Hollywood's golden age, Louise Beavers. You know how much I love to use a well-researched book as my primary source, but unfortunately, I could not find one on Louise Beavers. I did, however, read a remarkable book for my bonus episode this month titled Bright Boulevards, Bold Dreams, The Story of Black Hollywood by Donald Bogle. So I was able to pull some stuff from there to help with this episode. If you're interested in checking out that bonus episode, it is all about Black history in Hollywood, and it can be found along with other great bonus content at patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast. It saddens me that there isn't more comprehensive information out there about Louise Beavers, because her rise to fame and her journey through her career as a Black performer was not easy, to say the least. But she powered through and helped pave the way for other Black performers who came after her. Her story is very important, so I did my best to compile the most detailed and accurate information I could to honor her. Here we go. Louise Beavers was born on March 8, 1902 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to parents Ernestine and William. I couldn't find a lot of information about her childhood, but when Louise was 11 years old, her family relocated from Cincinnati to Pasadena, California, because of her mother's health. Ernestine was a voice teacher, so she coached Louise in singing from a young age. Louise sang in the church choir as a teenager. Louise graduated from Pasadena High School in 1920 and immediately went to work. Her first job was for a local photographer as a dressing room attendant. She followed this up with a job as a personal maid for silent film star Leatrice Joy. Louise Beavers began her life in show business by joining the Lady Minstrels Group, which was a group of 16 young Black women who performed on stage at the Loews Theater in Los Angeles. While performing with the group in 1926, an agent for Black actors named Charles Butler saw something special in her work and urged her to audition for a film role. She wasn't so sure, though. Like most other Black Americans, she wasn't a huge fan of the negative racial stereotypes that were being portrayed on the silver screen. But on the other hand, she thought maybe she could help change that. Somebody had to, right? She was brought in to audition for a role in the 1927 film Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she won the part. And from there, she would work consistently as a Hollywood actress, but all of her roles would fall into that same Black stereotype. She mostly played domestic workers or slaves. The first few films that Louise Beavers appeared in were silent films, and then things really took off after films finished their transition into the talking realm. Louise is often portrayed with a style of speech that makes her sound uneducated. You know the degrading Black dialect I'm talking about from that era. The truth of it was, however, that Louise Beavers spoke very eloquently, yet very soft in real life. She had a straight, clear California accent. Louise Beavers' role alongside Mary Pickford in 1929's Coquette was that of her former nanny. One of the most recognized scenes from the movie includes Louise Beavers, dressed in mammy attire, cradling Mary Pickford in her arms. The thing is, Mary Pickford was 36 years old at the time, and Louise Beavers, she was 27. The 1934 film Imitation of Life was groundbreaking for its time because it portrayed Louise Beavers' character Delilah as more of an equal to her white co-star Claudette Colbert's character. This movie broke racial barriers when it was released in 1934. This movie, amazing by the way, is our movie of the month over on Patreon if you want to come and join us. It's a powerful story about two women and their daughters and the different experiences both of the women and their girls have based on the color of their skin. Freddie Washington plays Louise Beavers' daughter. Fun fact, they were actually only 1 year apart from each other in age, so another one of those weird age situations in casting. As many of you know, Freddie Washington is a very light-skinned black woman, and Louise Beavers was a much darker-skinned black woman. So the main premise of the story centers around Freddie Washington's character wanting to live her life as a white woman, breaking her mother's heart along the way. It is a devastating story, but it held a very real message regarding race relations and discrimination. The most beautiful part of the movie is the beautiful friendship between Louise Beavers' character and Claudette Colbert's character. They were friends and business partners, a white woman and a black woman. Unheard of in those days. This role and the portrayal given by Louise Beavers was considered the most important film role ever to be played by a black actor up until that point in Hollywood. Louise was immediately widely considered to have deserved an Oscar nomination for her role in Imitation of Life. But she didn't. And although I think Claudette Colbert is very good in the movie, Louise Beavers has such a deeper character in the film. Such an emotional part that she played off so perfectly. I was bawling my eyes out the first time I watched it, and it usually takes someone I love dying to make me cry, so that tells you how gripping her portrayal was. She had me. And I think part of it was that you just love her character so damn much. She was so lovable, and it made her heartbreak that much sadder. Claudette Colbert was famously known for being somewhat difficult to work with, but Louise Beavers had nothing but good things to say about her after they had worked together on Imitation of Life. She said, quote, "Miss Colbert is one of the most gracious actresses in Hollywood. She is real. She is just herself. I do not know of anybody with whom I have enjoyed working as much as I did with her," end quote. Louise Beavers' performance in Imitation of Life was applauded from coast to coast. But unfortunately, it didn't signal a shift in her roles to more similar characters like Delilah in Imitation of Life. She fell right back into the roles of maids because no matter how amazing or well-received she was as Delilah, studio execs and directors simply couldn't get on board with keeping that kind of equality on screen going. Louise Beavers told Baltimore Afro-American journalist Lula Jones Garrett in 1935 in regards to playing subservient roles, quote, "As long as the plays are being written and produced by whites for whites, there will be the same chance for criticism. The only remedy is for such plays as would meet popular favor to be produced by us," end quote. The best thing black actresses who were forced to play mammy characters over and over could do was to make sure their one-liners were presented in a strong and memorable way. I really like how it was put in the Cincinnati Enquirer, quote, "With subtle strength, she tried to make the inhumane portrayals of minorities and women more human, more natural, more real than they were written," end quote. So she took what she was given and she did what she could to give some dignity to those roles. Louise Beavers did end up receiving the types of roles she wanted and deserved in the late 1930s, a couple times at least. Of course, it wasn't with one of the big five studios. That would just be silly to put a talented black woman in top billing. The two movies I'm referring to were 1938's Life Goes On and 1939's Reform School. These two films were made by $1 Million Productions, which was what they called a sepia company. They made movies with an all-black cast that were shown in black neighborhood theaters. Both of these movies were successful, largely due to the fact that they had Louise Beavers in them. In a review of Reform School in the Washington Afro-American, columnist Nell Dodson said, quote, "Reform School is superior to the average sepia film in every aspect, acting, lighting, dialogue, and direction," end quote. And specifically of Louise Beavers, she wrote, quote, "She comes through with flying colors and a story especially written for her. She turns in a dramatic triumph," end quote. Now, if only she could get that kind of recognition in the white-dominated films from the white-dominated studios. Unfortunately, neither of these $1 Million Productions films survives today. 1939 brought the epic film Gone with the Wind to the world. It was the biggest thing in Hollywood. A huge deal. Many thought Louise Beavers would be the perfect fit for the role of Mammy. But the part was given to Louise's friend Hattie McDaniel. And Hattie McDaniel finally got through to Hollywood. She won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, becoming the first African American to win an Academy Award. This was a huge accomplishment for the Black community. But what isn't talked about very much is how Louise Beavers helped pave the way for Hattie McDaniel to win that award. It was her failure to be nominated for Imitation of Life, a huge mistake according to many people, that planted the seed in enough minds in the Academy to make the idea of a Black actor winning an Oscar a reality. I want to break really quickly and tell you about a podcast I recently discovered. It's called Stories We Tell Ourselves, and it's a really unique and interesting show. In each episode, host Andre McGee first shares a historical story, a biographical story. And then in the second half of each show is a fictional short story that intertwines with the first half. Charles Darwin, Walt Disney, Nikola Tesla, Anthony Bourdain. It's really unique and encourages listeners to dive into the complexities of life and emotion. Please give it a listen where you listen to your podcasts. Stories We Tell Ourselves with host Andre McGee. Okay, back to Louise Beavers. In response to the plans of a Hollywood bureau of the NAACP in 1946, Louise Beavers said, quote, "We do not need to be led by anyone taking our hands and leading us to the studios. Actors and actresses are all Dr. Jekylls and Hydes. We play a role and then we forget it. It is not a matter of degrading the Negro race. I have seen many of our white friends play roles of different periods and classes, and often they have to use dialect, even as we sometimes do." End quote. So in other words, Louise Beavers wanted people to see that she was, in reality, doing great things for racial equality. Her portrayals on screen were for entertainment, but what she was doing in real life as Louise Beavers was good. She was proving that Black people could bust through racial barriers and have a strong, successful career. No, not nearly as easy as their white counterparts, but it was possible, and the more who succeeded, the more who could succeed later. The thing is, the subservient roles that actresses like Louise Beavers and Hattie McDaniel were playing in the 1930s and 1940s were the only roles available to them. Playing a maid or mammy character was the only option. It was either take those roles, for now, or don't get roles. Yes, of course they wanted to play better characters, less derogatory characters, but those roles did not really exist for Black actors in the major studio system. If you listen to my Hattie McDaniel episode, you may remember her quote about how she said she'd rather make $700 per week playing a maid than $7 per week as an actual maid. They were indeed paving the way for Black actors and actresses on screen, even if the parts weren't ideal. We have to remember the time and the level of racism and inequality in our country. Yes, it's outrageous to think about from a modern lens, but racial inequality ran deep in 1930s America. It's a stark reminder at how far we've come, and we should recognize and remember that. In the 1940s, Louise Beavers and Hattie McDaniel lived in the same neighborhood once they were able to afford the homes of their dreams. It was an affluent neighborhood in LA known as Sugar Hill. Ethel Waters lived there too. There were actually a handful of successful Black residents who owned homes in the Sugar Hill neighborhood. But so did a bunch of white people, and they didn't like those Black people living in their neighborhood. Even though those Black people purchased their homes and plots with their very own hard-earned money. Very hard-earned money. The white neighbors formed an association and brought suit against the Black residents of Sugar Hill, trying to force them out of their own homes. Their claim was that the Black homeowners were in violation of Los Angeles's racially restrictive covenant system. It went all the way to the California Supreme Court, simply because rich racist white people couldn't stand the idea of rich Black people living near them. Well, the Black homeowners won. The California Supreme Court decided on December 6, 1945, that the Black property owners of Sugar Hill had full rights to their own properties under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. These amazing Black individuals were not willing to step down. They were not going to cave to racism, not in their own homes. They fought for their rights, their property, and the people of color all over the country, present day and future. Hattie McDaniel died in 1952. At the time of her death, she had been recently cast in the television series Beulah, having replaced Ethel Waters, after starring in the highly successful radio series. After Hattie's death, her good friend Louise Beavers took over the role. She starred in the show for 1 year until the end of the series. After the end of Beulah in 1953, it wasn't until Julia, starring Diane Carroll, debuted in 1968 before another Black woman would star in a title role of a television series. 15 years. That's a long time. In the mid-1950s, Louise Beavers became involved in the civil rights movement. She used her platform to bring awareness to the treatment of African Americans in the film industry, both in the types of roles they were offered and their treatment behind the scenes. She was very involved in the Los Angeles Black community. As for her love life, there really wasn't much information out there, just that she was married twice. Her first marriage being to a man named Robert Clark in 1936, which lasted 10 years, and her second to a man named Leroy Moore in 1948, or 1952, depending on the source. She was married to Leroy Moore for the rest of her life, which sadly wasn't long. Louise Beavers died from a heart attack on October 26, 1962, at the age of 60. She died exactly 10 years after her friend Hattie McDaniel, to the day. Louise's husband died just 4 months after her. I really, really wish I had more information to share with you about the life of Louise Beavers. I just think of the other individuals I've covered and how many of them have multiple 250 to 300-page books written about their lives, no detail left unsaid. Yet everything I could find about Louise Beavers was not much more than just a brief textbook biography. Typically, I would consider not even covering someone who didn't have much out there on them. But when I feel like an individual needs to be known and their story needs to be heard, even if we don't have a whole lot of that story, then I'm going to share what I can. Black entertainers like Louise Beavers were underappreciated and mistreated, all because of the ridiculous fact that their skin color was darker than the people in charge. I think it's really, really important for our generation and generations in the future to know what was actually going on in our past. How horribly Black Americans were treated. The insane amount of hatred that existed. The hatred still exists, and sadly it likely always will, but we are a better society now. Most days I think we are, at least. And that is thanks to trailblazers like Louise Beavers, who paved the way for future Black actors and put so much of her energy into fighting for civil rights. Now I would like to share a couple of interesting things I learned during my research, and then I have a little something extra for you at the end. Bullet point number 1. Louise Beavers hated to cook, even though the majority of her roles were that of a maid or cook. Maybe that's why she hated it so much. Bullet point number 2. Piggybacking on that, Louise's second husband Leroy was a professional chef. So, lucky for her, she probably didn't need to worry about cooking. I would love to be married to a chef. And sadly, that's all I have to give you. But hopefully this little bit of information can help Louise Beavers' legacy shine a little brighter and she can become known by a few more people. Okay, so since this would be a pretty short episode just leaving it here, I decided to share a little fun information from my life as a preschool teacher. Because my students are just wonderful little humans and I learn so much from them every single day about being kind, expressing love, and being sympathetic and respectful to others. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a school holiday for most schools around the country, but not for my preschool. I decided when I began my program that we had to have school on MLK Day because it was a day of great learning opportunity. And each year, it is one of my favorite days as a teacher. I teach my students, in an age-appropriate manner, of course, how people who look different were treated very badly in our past. I show them pictures of Dr. King and tell them his story. I ask them if they think he looks like a nice man, and I hear responses like, he looks really nice, or I like his hair, or he looks really beautiful. None of them ever mention the color of his skin. I should point out that we live in northern Minnesota, where the majority of the population are blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavians. So our youth doesn't have that much diversity in their everyday lives. To prove this, I've been an early childhood educator for 19 years, and I've had 2 Black children in my program. 2. And their mothers are, you guessed it, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavian women. Anyways, although the children in my program don't see much diversity in their lives, they still don't point out the color of Dr. King's skin. Then I tell them to look at each other and notice differences in their friends. Child A may have long hair and child B may have short hair. Child A has hazel eyes and child B has blue eyes. Child A has straight hair and child B has curly hair, and so on. I ask them how it would feel if we all looked the same, and they all just laugh and say that would be silly and boring. Then I tell them how Martin Luther King Jr. and other people who looked like him were treated very poorly because their skin was a little darker than others. I say, do you think that is fair or kind? Absolutely not. They're outraged, these little kids. We read a story about Dr. King's childhood, and someone always says, I would love to play with him. We do an activity where each child shares an idea of how we can make the world a kinder place. I write each answer on a cutout heart, and they are hung on the wall as a classroom display for the remainder of the school year. Just so you can see the level of love and kindness that I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by on a daily basis, I'm going to share a few of their ideas of kindness with you now. 3-year-old Dominic said, if someone doesn't have a pet, I could give them one, because pets make people really happy. 4-year-old Quinn said, be loving to everyone every single day, especially our families. 5-year-old Britta said, every person should water one little tree every day. 3-year-old Tristan said, play with all your friends so no one gets sad. 5-year-old Delia said, if people are stuck in trees, we should help them get out of them. 3-year-old Lincoln said, always share your hot dogs. He thought that was really, really important. And 5-year-old Ruby said, if anyone is sad, we should give them a puppy, a unicorn, a bunny, and a rainbow stuffed animal, and a big hug and play with them all day. So if you're ever sad, hit up Ruby. Even without the puppy and unicorn, she has a spirit that lights up the room. It's hard to be sad around Miss Ruby. I am so blessed to spend my days surrounded by so much love and happiness. I teach 3, 4, and 5-year-old children, and kids that age just love so holistically. They don't hesitate to say, I love you, or you are so pretty, or any kind of compliment. At the end of the school day a couple weeks ago, a 4-year-old boy said about another 4-year-old boy's mother, almost as a spoken thought. I don't think he was really saying it to me or to anyone. He said, I really like the way her face looks. That's 4-year-old speak for, I think she's really pretty. I told him that was a really nice thing to say, and I bet his friend's mom would love to know that he thought that. I didn't tell him he should tell her, I just said that she would enjoy it and left it up to him. So as she approached for her child, he looked her right in the eyes with the most real and compassionate expression on his little face and repeated it to her. "I really love the way your face looks." I thought the mother was going to cry. Now, I'm used to getting compliments like that all day, lucky me. But this sentiment just took her breath away. It was 8 little words, but it made her entire day, probably her entire week. How many of us see a nice quality in someone, whether it be physical or in their personality, and actually tell them we like that about them? We don't. Not as much as we should, at least. But small children do. And that is the kind of lessons I am taught every day from them. They are my teachers far more than I am theirs. I hear, "I love you, Miss Erin," at least a dozen times every day, and I receive double that amount of hugs every day. Many classrooms don't allow hugs anymore, but hugs will always be allowed in my classroom. If we take away a developing child's means of expressing love, what kind of lessons are we teaching them? What kind of people are we forming? Hug away, kids. I shared this insight into my daily life because I am lucky to have a constant reminder that we as a people are better today than we once were. We are so much better than Louise Beavers' day. Today's children, at least the ones I am lucky enough to spend my days with, are kind, loving, and considerate. They are remarkable people. They are our future, and I am so dang proud to say that I know them. I sit amongst hope every day. Well, sit is a stretch. My job doesn't really allow for much sitting. I am amongst hope for today and hope for tomorrow. And I'm happy to share some of that hope with you today. So I hope that Louise Beavers and all of the others who fought through obstacles and hatred their entire lives are able to look down today and see how far we've come. There is still a lot of ugliness out there, but I think there is more love than ugly. Let's keep building on that love. In conclusion, Louise Beavers broke through racial barriers as a Black actress in the Hollywood's golden age. She was one of the most famous Black actresses in the 1930s. The most famous white actresses of the 1930s were Bette Davis, Myrna Loy, Jean Harlow, Katharine Hepburn, Carole Lombard. Most people would recognize all those names, right? Well, unless you are well-versed in old Hollywood, many people wouldn't recognize the name Louise Beavers, despite the fact that she appeared in over 100 films between 1929 and 1960. And she gave so much more than any of those other names, in my opinion, because she fought through racial barriers to make film roles more available and more influential for Black actors and actresses. She gave us such a powerful performance in Imitation of Life, and her character was maybe not completely equal to, but pretty equal to the white character in the movie played by Claudette Colbert. They were best friends, and their friendship didn't consider the color of their skin at all. Yes, societal circumstances made the color of their skins shine brightly in the contrast of their experiences in life. But when it came down to the love for each other behind the closed doors of their home, color didn't matter. And that was pretty powerful in 1934. Thank you, Louise Beavers, for paving the way for Black actors and actresses of your future. You sacrificed so much for the good of those who came behind you. And thank you all for listening. If you want to join the Movie of the Month Club, head on over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to join. For just $4 per month, you can join the Movie of the Month Club and access my recap episodes each month, join in on the discussions, and you'll also get a shout out on an episode, and I'll send you a Stars of the Golden Age sticker. For $8 per month, you get all of that plus a full-length bonus episode each month and access to all past episodes. This month's bonus episode is Black History in Hollywood. Last month was the history of the Hollywood sign, so lots of really interesting information to gain from those monthly bonus episodes. But the best part about joining the Patreon is supporting a show you love. Well, that hopefully you love. You can also support the show by sharing a 5-star rating on your podcast app and a positive review if you're able to where you listen. This really helps with discoverability for new listeners. And one final thing, a special shout out to our rescue dog, Jersey, who spends every minute of my script writing snuggled up to me and continuously lays her big cute head on my keyboard. making script writing take twice as long as it should. For this episode, I used an article from Immortal Ephemera from March 11th, 2013, an article from the Cincinnati Enquirer from March 21st, 2016, a book titled Bright Boulevards, Bold Dreams by Donald Bogle, blackpast.org, Wikipedia, and IMDB.